China's economy is often hailed as an economic miracle, a juggernaut that has lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty and become the world's factory. Yet, beneath the surface of dazzling growth numbers and technological advancements, are there fault lines that could disrupt this narrative? Could China's economy be more fragile than it appears, and is it merely a ticking time bomb waiting to explode? Now, before we delve into the specifics, it's crucial to understand that economies are not monolithic entities that move in a single direction. They are intricate systems influenced by a myriad of factors, both internal and external. In the case of China, the story is no different. While the headlines often focus on its meteoric rise, it's the subtler, less talked about issues that could determine its long-term trajectory. So, what are these underlying currents that could destabilize the foundation of China's economic skyscraper? 1. The debt dilemma. China has seen a dramatic rise in debt over the past decade, primarily due to credit being funneled into state-owned enterprises following the global financial crisis. While some argue that the debt is manageable because it's mostly state-owned, the reality is far more nuanced. The rate at which companies are borrowing is alarming. Since 2008, non-financial sector debt to GDP has skyrocketed, fueled by government encouragement to support economic growth. Companies, especially state-owned ones, have been feasting on cheap credit, but many of these enterprises are unprofitable and inefficient. The corporate landscape is even more concerning. As borrowing increases and earnings stagnate, companies are finding it increasingly difficult to keep up with repayments. The number of companies with healthy debt-to-earnings ratios has fallen by 31.7%, painting a bleak picture of corporate financial health. Even the banks are not immune. Official figures put non-performing loans on China's commercial banks at around 1.5 trillion yuan, but some analysts argue that the actual figures could be up to 14 times higher. This discrepancy arises because lenders employ various methods in concealing the real numbers. The government's ability to manage the situation is also under scrutiny. While it's true that China has little overseas debt and a high national savings rate, the rapid increase of debt has historically led to financial crashes or economic downturns in other countries. The government's control over both the lending and borrowing sides might offer some leeway, but it's a double-edged sword. The government's role in the shaping of the economy is both a boon and a bane, a paradox that has experts and laymen alike scratching their heads. On one hand, the central government has the power to enact sweeping changes at a moment's notice, a flexibility that many Western democracies lack. On the other hand, this very power raises questions about the long-term sustainability of such policies, especially when they appear to be at odds with each other. Take, for instance, the government's approach to the debt crisis. While Beijing has been cautious about implementing large-scale stimulus measures, local governments are burdened with massive debts. The total size of the local government's debt burden is estimated to be between $13 trillion and $23 trillion, and many provinces are on the brink of default. This creates a precarious situation where the central government's restraint is at odds with the local government's desperate need for funds. 2. The Deflation Conundrum. Then, there's the deflation in China, albeit this is not just a domestic issue, but rather a global concern. The country's economic challenges have led to deflationary pressures that are likely to accelerate in the coming quarters. In July, China's headline consumer price index fell 0.3% year-on-year, registering deflation for the first time in over 2 years. This presents a contrasting problem to the inflation faced by major companies in the West. While some of this can be attributed to transitory factors like low energy and pork prices, core inflation has also been impacted by falling prices in shelter and related categories, thanks to the struggling property sector. The implications of China's deflation are far-reaching. A weaker yuan and elevated inventory-to-sales ratio could lower the cost of Chinese goods abroad, affecting developed markets. Moreover, China's economic weakness and falling prices are likely to spill over into global markets. This could be good news for Western central banks fighting against elevated inflation, but it's a double-edged sword. Persistent deflation in China could lead to a downward spiral, affecting global consumer markets and potentially leading to more prolonged and pronounced inflationary pressures worldwide. The government's response to these weakening fundamentals has been far from sufficient. Measures to stimulate and stabilize growth through easy credit have not been enough to offset the drag from the property market. The flow of new credit to the economy has contracted over the past year, deepening disinflationary pressures and hitting domestic investment. This has led to broad-based excess capacity in manufacturing, further exacerbating the pressures. But deflation is just one piece of the puzzle. Another sector that's deeply entangled with China's economic woes is real estate, a market that has long been a cornerstone of the nation's growth. 3. The real estate riddle. Recent times have seen this once booming industry falter, sending tremors through the nation's economy. Major developers are facing enormous losses, struggling under mountains of debt, and missing payments to lenders. The long-running building boom that once propelled China's growth has come to a screeching halt, affecting jobs and savings of millions of households. The situation has become so dire that China's markets have tumbled, and its currency has weakened as officials scramble to spur growth. The crisis is not just limited to big developers, it's a ripple effect that's shaking the very foundation of China's economy. The real estate sector's downturn has led to a decrease in consumer spending, affecting small businesses and even the manufacturing sector. The government's attempts to control the crisis have been a mixed bag. On one hand, they've imposed stricter regulations on property development, but on the other, these measures have led to a decline in property prices, affecting the wealth of millions of Chinese households who have invested in real estate. The government's role in the real estate sector is another example of the policy paradox we discussed earlier. While Beijing has imposed stricter regulations to prevent a property bubble, these very measures have led to a decline in property prices, affecting the wealth of millions of Chinese households who have invested in real estate. This dual role of the government as both regulator and stakeholder creates a complex web of interests that is difficult to untangle. 4. The consumption. And lastly, there's consumer spending in China, which has always been a topic of interest, especially given the country's massive population and growing middle class. However, despite the government's efforts to stimulate consumer spending, the results have lacked. The central government has listed various measures to encourage people to spend, such as subsidies for trading in older cars for newer models and cutting entrance fees at scenic sites to promote tourism. Yet, the recovery seems to be flagging, and the urgency to boost the economy has never been greater. The reluctance to spend is not just a matter of economic policy, it's deeply rooted in the culture and mindset of the Chinese people. The traditional Chinese values of thriftiness and the importance of saving for the future have made consumers cautious about spending, especially in uncertain times. This cautious approach has been exacerbated by the ongoing real estate crisis, as many households have significant property investments, which is now a volatile asset. Moreover, the government's stimulus plan has been met with skepticism. While the measures may look good on paper, the absence of details on how much the government will spend to support these plans has led to doubts about their effectiveness. The lack of transparency has further eroded consumer confidence, making people even more hesitant to open their wallets. As we sift through the layers of China's economic narrative, we find a story that is neither black nor white, but filled with shades of gray. The country's economic trajectory is a subject of global interest, not just because of its size, but also because of its interconnectedness with the world economy. So, as we look to the future, we are left with a nuanced question. Is China's economy on the brink of collapse, or is it a misunderstood giant that has more to offer than meets the eye? If you liked the video, please consider subscribing and sharing so we can keep bringing more content like this. See you next time.